Welcome to the RD Squeeze. I'm Mickey.
And I'm Emily.
And we're two dietitian besties here to squeeze out the misinformation around health and nutrition.
Hey everyone, welcome to season 4 of the RD Squeeze. I cannot believe we are in season 4 already, Mickey.
Where did time go? I don't know, but we're here and we're ready and we have an amazing plan for this season. And you're going to be seeing a lot of our next guest, hopefully this season, if all works out according to plan. Mwahaha. But yeah, I'm very excited for this whole season, but this episode in particular, because you get to meet one of our favorite dietitians.
Yes, so Aubrey Redd is a dietitian and owner of Aubrey Redd Nutrition LLC. She gives outpatient nutrition counseling individually to focus on sustainable lifestyle changes. She also works towards specializing in hormonal, fertility, prenatal, and overall wellness for women. So that's kind of the gist of this season 4 is we're going to focus a little more on our women and the health and nutrition that they need some focus on, especially with all the questions and all that misinformation out there. She also serves as the culinary nutrition manager at Unite for Her and an adjunct professor at Immaculata University in Pennsylvania. We have a theme going. We have a lot of Pennsylvania known dietitians. So we welcome Aubrey. So thanks so much for joining us on the RD Squeeze. We're so happy you get to start us off this season and to really dive into these hormonal nutrition, kind of the misinformation out there around it. So thanks for coming on, Aubrey.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited for this. Again, I think women's health is really prominent now. We're seeing a lot of things coming around about it, to not ignore it, and things that were never touched on or were kind of ignored. We want to put a spotlight on that, and that's what this season is for. We of course might have some other topics in there, and of course not just specific to women, but we want to really put that focus out there. So, Aubrey, we want to kind of learn, what got you into nutrition, and, tell us a little bit about your history of like your schooling and where you are now. What got you there?
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm sure everybody in every job has this, but I feel like especially dietitians, everybody's like, how did you get into nutrition? How did you start this? So my elevator pitch story on how I got into nutrition was that when I was in high school, on a whim, I must have watched a documentary or something and decided to become a vegetarian. And at that point, I was a junior in high school. So I was also at that time that I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And my tennis coach, I was on the varsity tennis team, he just kept asking, how are you going to get protein? How will you get protein if you're a vegetarian? And I kind of just turned to him and said, I don't know how I'm going to get protein. I'm not sure. So I started looking into it. And I think just doing that research was very interesting to me. At the same time, my parents were very much like, we don't know what to cook for you because you're a vegetarian. So I also felt like I got very into cooking and the culinary world at that time because I was learning how to utilize vegetarian options for proteins and things of that nature. So it really all fell together at the same time as I was deciding what to do for college. And so that's when I decided to major in nutrition. And I went to Westchester University here in Pennsylvania for actually all of my schooling. So I got my bachelor's there in nutrition and dietetics. And then I went on to do an accelerated master's program in community nutrition. And I was working in community programs. I was working for a program through Drexel University in Philadelphia to do community and school nutrition education. And then I went back to school after a little bit and I got my dietetic internship and became a registered dietitian. So I took my exam, started working at a hospital for a little while. I knew it wasn't totally what I wanted to do. But then once I got into the outpatient setting, I realized that's just what I really loved. And that's kind of how I landed where I am now. So I have my own private practice where I do outpatient counseling, and I work particularly with women going through either life shifts, right? Like the life shift of menopause, or maybe planning for pregnancy, for example. And then I also have another role as the culinary nutrition manager at an oncology nonprofit where I work with a lot of women going through breast and ovarian cancer who are also going through many hormonal changes. So I think that's what really brought the women's health and the hormonal health to the forefront for me in my experience.
That's so great. And I feel like we have a lot of, we were talking about this before we hit record, a lot of, similarities in our backgrounds and like, especially the populations we work with today. I don't work a lot with the prenatal population, but those women in that menopause age and oncology, like you get so many questions and all this misinformation out there. So that's really why we wanted you on today, to kind of clear up some of that, describe and talk about kind of what you do with those women, with those populations, the big questions you always get. And my next question is, are you still a vegetarian?
You know what? I'm not actually. I do so strongly see the benefits of eating more plant forward, but I don't identify as a vegetarian anymore. I do eat a lot of really plant-based meals, but I do have chicken and fish and seafood and, all of those things now and again too. So I kind of have a mix of everything now.
That's awesome.
I was going to say too, it's funny that so you have a lot in common with Emily like now, but I also, like I said, started in community nutrition, and I was doing the school age like nutrition education. So it's kind of cool to see like how we've all like transpired into different dietitians, but like the commonalities are still there. So that's really cool too. And yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. But yeah, that's great.
I also feel like if you know when you're going to school for nutrition, like I also was very like community prevention focused, not really hospital. Like they kept talking about inpatient. And I'm like, that's not what I want to do. I feel like when you go to school to be a dietitian, like you know what you want to do. Now, I think having that background, that clinical background, of course, is super important. But you also know, like, not really what I want to do. You tried it, you did it, but you knew that's not what you wanted. So, I mean, talk a little bit about that as you were going through undergrad. Like, was your mind just completely set on community and like outpatient nutrition, or were you like, no, let me try inpatient?
Yeah, no, I never thought I was going to try inpatient. I actually, and maybe you two felt similarly. I think historically, I think we do a lot better job of it now, but I actually really didn't understand the pathway when I was first in school, right? I didn't know that I was going to school for nutrition to get my master's and to do my DI and then to become a registered dietitian. I just thought, like most people, I was getting a 4-year degree and then the next step was getting a job. But I did always feel super passionate about community nutrition. I always wanted to work in a community setting, and really the vision originally was WIC. So I feel like it's funny now that I'm back in the population with women. I worked at WIC very briefly before I transitioned to the role at Drexel, and I actually wasn't originally going to become a dietitian. I kind of figured I was going to stop with my undergraduate, my master's degree. But it actually was my supervisor at that role. She said, I think you have a lot of potential. I really think you would benefit from going back to school and doing this. So I said, okay. So I went back to school. And that's when I went into my internship. And then I started in a clinical role a few days after I finished my internship, mostly because it was the first job I could get. And I thought it was fine. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed that kind of fast-paced environment and population there. But I think in my heart, I always knew I was going to move back more towards community and this one-on-one, more outpatient type of setting.
So what came first? Did the oncology and the Unite for Her come first, or did doing your private practice come first?
Doing my private practice came first. I actually am like very much of a go-getter kind of gal. And so I finished my internship and then I filed for my LLC a few days later because I just knew, I think that I wanted to have something for myself. I think particularly as a woman of color, right? Like it was important for me to just have this really strong autonomy over my career and my path. And so I had always had a vision of having a business. And so I filed for my LLC right after I finished my internship in 2021. So it's about 4 years now. And yeah, then I ended up at Unite for Her about 3 years ago. So about a year after I started in private practice.
Okay. And then is that like where some of the more woman prominent questions or maybe counseling came in, was through that?
Definitely, because with the population I work with at Unite for Her, it is exclusively breast and ovarian cancer. And so, really, everybody who I speak to is going through some sort of hormonal journey. A lot of people are taking estrogen medications that diminish or shut down their estrogen production. And so, their lives are really changed after that. And so I think that was what really spurred me thinking about hormones in general. And now hormones are everywhere, right? We hear about them all the time. And so I think that was what really spurred my passion into just particularly women's health as a whole. And I also started just by happenstance seeing a few more prenatal and fertility clients in private practice. It was kind of a word of mouth. I saw one or two, and they told their friends who were trying to get pregnant that they should work with me. And I really realized there that I just loved working with those particular people throughout their journeys.
I think such an area no one really thinks about. I think I was even just reading something. It's like, well, when you get diagnosed or when you have a miscarriage or something like that, like you want to know nutritionally what you can do, or when you become pregnant, you want to know nutritionally what you can do then. But what about beforehand too, right? Like what we should be focusing on that beforehand too. So I guess another question is just like, what, obviously some people were having success with you and they were referring, but how else did like word of mouth get out, even about like your LLC? What do you do for that?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer to that myself. But I think it's a combination of, I'm just a very social, extroverted person. So I think it's a lot of word of mouth when it comes to clients speaking to new people, but also me connecting with other providers, other professionals, other community organizations. I have just like a great community where I live, so I'm talking to a lot of people that way who are referring out, and just social media, right? I think, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, just social media in general. But I think social media is a platform that I found a lot of success on finding people who really need or could be supported by nutrition education.
So going into social media, do you do a lot of social media? Do you post a lot? Or where do you feel your value comes into play in social media?
Yeah, I think where it started was I've had a lot of ebbs and flows when it comes to social media, as I think many a business owner could probably empathize with. But where it started, I think, was with me just really posting about like, what does a dietitian do? I couldn't tell you the amount of people that I talk to who have no idea what a dietitian does, or they never heard of them before. They maybe only heard the word nutritionist. So I think a lot of just general education about what dietitians do was my messaging at first. This was really before I had a refined message around women's health. And then just information sharing, because I think, who am I to gatekeep this information? If somebody could get all the information they need from my social media page, I want that for them. I want to be able to be a pillar of education in this community, because I think there's so much misinformation out there. And so I want to be able to share information from a qualified source so people feel comfortable and they can, show their friend and be like, oh, I saw this on Aubrey's Instagram. She was talking about, I don't know, foods for your luteal phase or something like that, right? I want to be able to show people that there is this qualified information out there on social media. So I think that's kind of where my vision is now, is getting that information out there from a reputable source.
Yeah, I think I have my own LLC as well, and that's like I'm not good at it. I've posted a lot of stuff, and I'm like, okay, it's there right now. Maybe I'll get back into it in a little while. Now it's the podcast time, so we'll get things out there this way. But yeah, I think social media definitely, today's world is like where we need to be, but also like we didn't go to school to be on social media to market, but it is a part of what we do. So that's why we're hoping this podcast is available for people to listen into and to hopefully showcase some information, and clarify some of that misinformation. So I guess going then kind of reverting into the hormones and getting into that, what do you feel is like the biggest misinformation out there right now?
It's a loaded question, Emily. There's so much.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like that. Like, where do we start? Where, like I was thinking, like, what, like, how do we start even addressing this, Aubrey? Because that's like the whole reason why we got you onto this podcast too. Was just like there's so much that like we could cover, and I think it's so hard to narrow it down. Like, there's just so much that we can talk about, and I don't know, like it's like what's like the major thing that we should be addressing, but also should we just introduce the topic of hormones too? Like so many people don't even know what's going on like in their bodies, and like I mean, health education is not probably the best in all schools, and I know some schools like they don't even have, nutrition related, let alone, they're not talking about like their hormones and things like that. So what do we cover? Like what's the best introduction to someone who's completely, I'm talking about myself, like almost like how do we idiot proof this? Like, because this is not my realm. This is not my expertise by any means. So I'm learning today.
Yeah. I think at the essence, just starting with like what are hormones, right? What are hormones? And so hormones, we all have them. Animals have them too. We have them. They're chemical messengers. So in our body, they regulate tons of different body systems, from our metabolism to, for women, menstruation, to our mood, our energy, our fertility, our blood sugar. There are so many different hormones too. There's insulin, there's cortisol, there's ghrelin, there's leptin. There are just so many hormones that I think they play so many different roles in our body. And I think what we maybe missed, I know I did in school, was we really just didn't talk about them. We talked about menstruation maybe, but we didn't talk about these other hormones and their functions, or even what maybe the hormones in our body like estrogen and progesterone do during menstruation, right? And I think many people now, we know, struggle with hormonal related conditions. And so I think there is such a gap, right, in that information, because we didn't really learn about hormones to begin with. And now we're maybe finding out that we have a condition that's related to them. Oh gosh, how do I put two and two together? From what I've seen, research shows us that up to about 10% of women struggle from PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a hormonal related condition. We have thyroid conditions, which are extremely common, particularly in women. It's a higher likelihood of things like hypothyroidism. We also are, as women, typically going through particular hormonal journeys like fertility and pregnancy, as well as later in life, menopause. So I think thinking about hormones, they do so much in our body, and they are always changing, particularly in a woman's body. So it's just so interesting to be able to talk about them and talk about their purposes and functions. I feel like I love that capacity as a dietitian to be able to kind of dive in and explain some of those things, and to be able to tie things together to say, well, maybe this is because, we are having some, conditions, whether it's PCOS or this or that are impacting our hormones, that are causing issues with sleep or causing high appetite, right? Things like this, difficulty with weight maintenance. I like to be able to kind of be that bridge to put two and two together there.
Yeah. And I was just sitting here thinking, like, women go through so many phases of life.
Yes.
And the grace, and that's something I really educate on, is you're in this point of life. Give yourself grace. You just had a child. Give yourself grace. You're going through menopause. Give yourself some grace. Like, we're not going to be able to control everything in our life. What we do have control over, let's find a nourishing way and a balanced way to go about it, not a controlling way to go about it too.
Absolutely. And I'm sure maybe the two of you have said this too, because I think it just echoes and rings true, is a lot of times I'll talk to people and say, think about yourself or talk to yourself the way you would think about or talk to a really good friend, right? Give yourself that grace, especially thinking about working in the oncology community. A lot of times people are very critical of their diet and what they're putting into their body. And I always bring up the point, what if your best friend was going through breast cancer and maybe they ordered takeout last night? Would you shame them for ordering takeout last night? Probably not. You would say, you're going through a lot. Good for you for doing that for yourself. So I think I totally agree with that concept of like giving yourself grace, right? We all deserve this. And particularly, like you said, as women, we're going through so many changes in our life. I think it's well deserved.
And what about like macros, micronutrients? What can you kind of expand on with those topic areas when it comes to kind of putting them with hormones? Is there a connection? Is there not a connection?
Yeah. So there's definitely some connections, right? And I think this is where it comes into play, the importance of balance in what we're eating. And I think over time, almost every macronutrient, I mean, there's only 3, right? But out of the 3 macronutrients, at least 2 of them have been very demonized at periods of time, right? Carbohydrates have, and so have fats. I think protein is having a moment. It's the star right now. I don't know that there's been an era where protein has been demonized, but
yeah,
I think needless to say, there's a reason and a purpose for all of the macronutrients that we have, and they all do, in turn, they can tie into hormonal health. So thinking about starting with fats, right? We have such a wide variety of different fats, particularly things like omega-3 fatty acids and our monounsaturated fats. Really, they can work as the building blocks of our steroid hormones. So things like estrogen and progesterone. So particularly thinking about people going through like a menopausal transition, a lot of times we're talking about incorporating more omega-3 rich foods. I think for everybody, I usually am recommending that. But things like our nuts, our seeds, our fatty fish, for example, because they're really going to help as those building blocks. Then we have our protein, which again, having a moment right now, I think it's valuable, but I don't think it's the only valuable macronutrient that we have. I think where protein plays a role is that it can help to stabilize blood sugar. So a lot of times I will talk to people about balancing out their meals, particularly carbohydrate heavy meals, with some protein to help to stabilize the blood sugar. Because when we have maybe shifts of severity in our blood sugar, that can impact our hormonal health. Then we have our carbohydrates. They're going to be the kind of key pillar to impact our blood sugar. So we want to opt for carbohydrates that are more rich in fiber. Also, the more fiber that we're having, the better estrogen elimination system that we have in play. And as well, fiber helps with our gut health. And a lot of our hormones start in our gut, right? We think about our hunger and our fullness hormones, for example. So it's really important to get a balance of macronutrients. And I think where sometimes I see, I guess, just questionable maybe things with some social media is that I think a lot of times it is like villainizing or demonizing something, or discussions of complete elimination of particular things. But we don't need to eliminate things to be healthy. We actually need to add in more things to be able to really be healthy.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and you actually led into 2 points I wanted to go. So I'm kind of at like a fork in the road here. But in terms of like So we're talking about macronutrients. Now, micronutrients, so our vitamins and minerals, right? That's a huge topic. And that, like I said, that could take us one fork. So I'm going to have like choose your own path, Aubrey. Okay. So we're going to, and you have to cover both. It just depends on which one you want to cover first. The first area is the micronutrients. So we're talking like our vitamin D, our folate, our magnesium, our vitamin A, like all of those nutrients. And that also leads into supplementation. So I want to talk to you about that role that plays in our hormones. But also you touched on a little bit, which is the dieting aspect or elimination. So Emily and I have talked about a few different diets and the roles that those things play in our bodies as just humans. But so what happens to the body's hormones when you are kind of putting it under this diet or this stress of eliminating some certain food group or a macronutrient of some sort, or like what happens and how does that affect our hormone levels? So I'm going to let you choose your own path and then circle back to the other one.
I will start with the latter question, right? Like what happens when we're dieting to our hormones? So I think at the end of it all, essentially, whenever we're omitting a large group of foods, or particularly what I see is just generally undernourishment, right? Maybe we're omitting multiple things. And so we're just not getting in enough volume of calories or vitamins or minerals or the nutrients that we need. That's when we can see significant dysregulation in our hormones. A lot of times for women, it can present as hypothalamic amenorrhea. So that is a loss of our period. And that is something that is really a body's system for kind of hormone regulation, right? So thinking about that, if we're losing our period, certainly things can't be going well internally. And so I think I see a lot in this space is, people are trying to kind of find a quick fix or like personally modify their hormones. And while I think it's important, the role of a balanced diet in, regulated hormones, if you have a true hormone condition, for example, hypothyroidism, a lot of times the best treatment is medication, right? Is taking these next steps and seeing your medical provider and kind of getting the support needed there. So I always tell people, and this maybe has gone off on a different tangent. However, I always tell people, if you see a TikToker that says like, fix your hormones fast, run in the other direction, right? Nothing should be fast when it comes to our body's well-being. Like this should be a kind of like a lifelong journey for us. So needless to say, to backtrack a little bit, when we are undernourishing or inadequately nourishing our body, that's when we can see changes in our hormonal health that may lead to other problems, right? It may lead to difficulties with things like weight retention. We may see significant changes in the way we hold weight on our body. We might see issues with our blood sugar, for example. We might be much more sensitive to foods that we're eating, and our blood sugar may spike more. So I think it's important to have consistent nourishment and consistently well-balanced nourishment. Thinking about what that looks like, I know you were talking about micronutrients. A perfect segue is that as important as the macronutrients are, I think a lot of times we get bogged down by those and forget about the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals that we need. So there are certainly some vitamins and minerals that may need to be supplemented. And I say may because it very well depends on your lifestyle and your location. The three of us are located in Pennsylvania. We maybe all are deficient in vitamin D because typically we get vitamin D synthesized from the sun. Now, we may need supplementation for that. We may not. I think it's important to have your labs assessed before blindly supplementing. I think most other nutrients that we need, typically we can obtain them from dietary sources. So I know you're talking about folate. I feel like the MTHFR gene is also really like a buzz at present. And with that, I think there's just not enough information that says that we need to supplement alternatively to be able to adequately process or get the need for folate, right? People have been potentially living with this gene mutation for many years, but we've never been, changing the way we've been eating for it. I see a lot of buzz around like magnesium, right? I know we had the Sleepy Girl mocktails in this past year. I think sometimes supplements can be helpful for particular things. If you are really having issues with sleep, maybe you can trial something like a magnesium or a melatonin. But I think supplements play the role of that particular word, right? Supplement. They're supplementing a well-balanced diet as it is already. Some other nutrients that I think are important when it comes to hormonal health, so iron, very important because that's important for like ovulation and menstruation. All of our B vitamins. So I know I talked about folate, and some people may need extra supplementation of something like B12 if you're a vegan, for example. But it's important for our neurotransmitters and for energy. Zinc is really important for ovarian function, and thyroid function. So I think there are key roles to hormonal health with really all of our vitamins and minerals. And I think when we take them out of context sometimes and supplement exclusively one nutrient, if it's not necessarily warranted by our lab work or something like that, we're kind of pushing it out of the context in which it would be best utilized, which is when it comes with all the other nutrients from our food.
Yeah, I want to circle back to when you mentioned like hormonal changes and differences. How does someone know like if these things are going on? Are there tests that can be done? What can you say on that?
You certainly can get testing done. I think where most people have testing is around the time of a fertility journey. That's where I see most commonly like more extensive hormonal testing. So you're getting your follicle stimulating hormone, your FSH tested, you're getting your LH tested, your estradiol, right? You're getting lots of different testing done if you're going through a fertility journey, particularly if you are struggling to conceive. Now, I would say most common symptoms I hear from folks that I think this is where the maybe social media market can prey on people a little bit is like fatigue commonly comes with shifts in hormonal health. Weight gain can come with that. A lot of times people have poor sleep or poor stress management. Sometimes people will be moody or irritable. And I mean, who isn't? Right? I'm moody and irritable. Sometimes I don't sleep well. Sometimes I gain weight. All of these things I think we can all probably relate to. And I think that's what makes this hormonal health space kind of tricky in a sense that, we don't always know exactly what's going on, right? If somebody comes to me and just says they've been fatigued for the past year, well, there's a lot of directions we can go. It could be related to hormonal health. It could be related to iron deficiency. It could be related to something else. So, I think at baseline, I'm always encouraging everybody to just get like a comprehensive metabolic panel, no additional testing of hormones, throwing in the thyroid hormones if your doctor already wasn't going to test those, and throwing in vitamin D if your doctor wasn't going to test those. But I think that helps to just give a good baseline to see where are we starting? What are we working with, right? Is there just something glaring that's going to shine, like the iron deficiency, for example, that's going to show us, well, let's start there, right? Maybe it's not your cortisol. Maybe you just need some more iron.
And I think that's a huge reason why dietitians are so important in the medical field and in endocrinology, clinics, because we can help maybe look at some of those other lab values, order them, and be able to assess like, no, let's get a little bit more of this food in this person. I know they like to eat these things. I know they are undernourishing, and I know they like to eat because I'm seeing it later at nighttime when they're eating those high carb, high fat foods. When we want to nourish the body, like you mentioned earlier, just balanced and supplement that well balanced diet if we need to. Then if 2, 3, 6 months later we see their lab values not improve. So I think labs is a huge factor in how nutritionally we can treat and catch maybe some things that haven't been caught and have been ignored. And maybe we can touch on that a little bit. I know I might be switching topic here, but touching on just like, I'm going to say the ignorance of the health system with women and how we might turn a blind eye to some of these symptoms of like fatigue and irritability that are very, very common. Have you had women come to you and you've caught some of nutritional deficiencies or maybe other issues and concerns, like you mentioned with hypothyroid and maybe, you know, even endocrine other disruptors? Have you had women come to you and you've kind of been like I found out what's going on?
I definitely have. I think a lot of times, I think now a lot of folks are acknowledging their role, at least in the general public, are acknowledging the role of a dietitian a little bit more. I think sometimes it can be misguided, right? I certainly have lots of people who come to me and they're like, you are the supplement lady who's going to tell me what supplements to take. And then we kind of shift the conversation and it always ends so very positively. However, sometimes people are coming to me and they're like, I don't like my PCP. I've never had a good experience with my PCP. I haven't been in 2 years. And so we're really just getting that ball rolling. And, you know, I think I've even had a lot of conversations with people just about trying to find the right care provider for them. Because, like you said, I think there can be some level of like ignorance or just, I think in general, brushing symptoms off is what I see most commonly, right? Like saying, oh, it's just PMS. That's fine. Of course you're going to have cramping. Of course you're going to be tired. Of course you're going to feel this. Or, oh, it's just menopause. I think women very much get the it's just treatment often. And so I definitely have had kind of some of those aha moments where I've helped people to say like, well, let's just see, you know, if we can get just like another round of testing. Like they didn't test your hemoglobin A1C for some reason, or they didn't test your vitamin D, so let's test that. You know, I think I definitely have had those experiences. And I think too, to give credit to the medical community, you know, without just saying like there's some ignorance there, is that I think especially now doctors are just pushed to the maximum of being so busy, right? You know, I used to work in an endocrinologist office and they, which I thought was wild, they always booked 2 appointments at the same time. I think the assumption was like maybe one of them wouldn't show and then the other person would have the time. But if both people showed up, now you had to have that same appointment within that window of time for 2 people. So I think providers, medical providers are just so stretched thin. That's where I think that beautiful role of us as dietitian comes into play, because we have an hour. Some insurance companies cover a 2-hour visit, right? So I have maybe an hour or 2 hours to talk to somebody. I can pull up their labs. I can share their screen. I can answer all of their questions. You know, I have people come all the time who say one of their labs was like red or green, right? Like it was too low or too high, but their doctor didn't say anything. And they're like, well, should I be worried about that? You know, they didn't say anything. And so then I can help them interpret that and just to feel more comfort and ease around like, it's okay, you know, that your blood sugar was like 2 numbers high. Like maybe you just had something last night. You know, I think it's helpful to just put people's mind at ease there.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of good points there, Aubrey. And I think, you know, circling kind of back to what you initially talked about was, you know, doctors are spread thin and, you know, the whole entire health community is spread thin. And I mean, I think we've all, as women, probably had some sort of experience where we've gotten that dismissal of our symptoms at some point in our lives. I mean, I have that story, and, you know, it made me distrust a lot of health, you know, health professionals in terms of like being able to go to them and say like, hey, I have this symptom. And like, for me, that took I'm still working through that. It took me a long time to even feel comfortable finding another primary care doctor. And so then that also inhibits you from getting diagnosed with anything. And for a long time, one of the things that happened to me is I was complaining about fatigue and headaches, and I had other symptoms. And nobody really tested me for anything. They kind of all like just kind of mentioned a few things or prescribed a medicine, but nobody really ever told me what it was. And I still have never been diagnosed with this one thing that I think I have, which is PCOS. But I have all the medications pretty much that would say otherwise, but nobody's ever officially diagnosed me. But then you also get into the cycle of referral cycling. So, and this is kind of very off topic, but like, so you'll have your primary care, refer you to maybe like an endocrinologist, or your gynecologist is, the person that you went to because you have really terrible cramps. And they're like, well, you can go see, this person or this person. I had to advocate for a referral to a rheumatologist because I felt like I had an autoimmune disease, which I ended up having. So like it's almost like you do have to self-advocate, and you almost have to get comfortable with being like in your head a hypochondriac, because that's what I thought I was. I was like, I'm making up all these symptoms. I'm making myself seem sicker than I am. But I also was like, but I have to tell them how bad it is for them to actually do anything about it, which it couldn't. Like, I was getting really bad period cramps, but I was like, well, on a scale of like 1 to 10, they're like at a 4, when maybe they were really at a 7. But I was like, I don't want to seem like a crybaby, you know what I mean? So like, there's, and I'm kind of rambling here, but it's just like, there's all of these like inhibitors that make us feel like we are, especially as women, are quote unquote crazy, because there's all these obstacles that we have to go over to even get a certain diagnosis or be treated. And where I'm going with this is, we've harped on this so many times on this podcast, we can't all be experts in everything, right? Like, people, I think, invest so much in doctors being the expert, and yes, they are medical experts, but they are not all experts in hormonal health. They are not all experts in autoimmune health. They are not all experts in, oncology, in diabetes. They all have their specialties, and that's why you have a specialty in a medical profession. You pick a specialty. But in this case, dietitians are the nutrition expert. So if you are concerned about any nutrition things, that's when you ask for a referral or you seek out a dietitian. Because if that is what your concern is, then that is who you should be going to. You shouldn't expect your medical doctor or your primary care or whoever to be fully versed in how to help treat your nutrition related symptoms. And that is my big tangent, and probably the most I will talk on this episode. But the way you laid that all out, I was like, there are so many instances where this can apply to so many women, even men potentially. I mean, it can apply to anybody where you feel confused and you don't know who to go to. And I think the best thing that we probably all could recommend is just to self-advocate and ask for help. And yes, it's a pain in the butt to make the appointment, to take off work, to drive to wherever these are. I mean, hopefully some are covered with telehealth, whatever, and I'm covering a lot. But regardless, like, it is, if you can afford it and you have the ability to, ask for a second opinion or a referral, please advocate for that. Especially, I'm going to clap our dietitians, prop them up, but like, just ask for that second opinion, ask for a different expert, or do the research and try and find somebody else, because you're never going to be satisfied until you feel like you have a definitive answer, whether that's a diagnosis or not. But I always feel like that diagnosis of something, and I'm not saying everybody's going to be diagnosed with something, but if you feel like there's something wrong, there probably is. And how do we treat it? But you'll also get that relief, like, oh, I wasn't crazy. Oh, I had every right to ask for what I needed. So there's really no question or follow-up. I don't know. Thoughts, both of you, on that?
Yeah. No, I think it's important. I think that advocacy aspect is so important. And I see it a lot in the oncology space, right? People feeling like maybe something's just still not right, and getting that second opinion, which could be finding out that maybe they should be on a different treatment or something of that nature. But I think, just generally speaking, there are PCPs, of course. I think a lot of times PCPs, their benefit is they're there quick. You need them for something one-off. You have a cold or what have you. You need a quick medication. But if you're having a more serious condition, they are going to, like you said, there's going to be that kind of like referral network. I think doing that maybe either research or just having that discussion if you have a good relationship with your PCP about like what type of provider should I be seeing about this, right? I have these issues. And particularly when it comes to nutrition, medical providers across the board, right? Like doctors, PCPs, endocrinologists, this and that, they usually have one class on nutrition. And I think I have unfortunately had to many times undo things that medical providers have said in nutrition appointments, being the expert in nutrition. And so I think it's always best practice if you can seek a specialist, right, in nutrition, in autoimmune conditions, in hormones, like your endocrinologist, for example. It's always going to be the best kind of turn of events, especially as long as you can find a provider that you really like. Now, maybe you will have to wait a few months because I feel like that is kind of the nature of specialists in today's day and age. But I think being able to get those answers, like you said, Mickey, is just so validating, right? And even if the answer is, okay, you thought it was this, but we did all the testing and that's not what it's showing, at least you have that answer to say, okay, it's not what I thought it was. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's so much more that we probably would want to cover. And that's why I think, we could probably have this conversation go on for like 10 hours because there's like so many more questions I have to ask you. And, we really want to get into the nitty gritty of, kind of every stage of life for women with you eventually. So we're not going to cover that today, spoiler alert, but we are going to cover it in future episodes, hopefully. But I think, unless you have anything else to cover, I think that sums up our our introduction to what all the knowledge that you have, Aubrey. So with that said, any final concluding thoughts before we get into our sweet and sours for the episode?
I guess just in conclusion, and this is just speaking more broadly and generally about all kind of, nutrition conditions, right, is that if I can ride one thing home is that you shouldn't be focusing or letting somebody, right, an influencer, what have you, push you in the direction of like elimination and cutting out this and cutting out that. Nutrition is all about addition, right? Particularly when it comes to hormonal health. We want to add protein, omega fatty acids. We want to add color. We want to add fiber. So if you're going on your own journey and you're just trying to get some answers, the influencer who maybe doesn't have any credentials and says like just cut out dairy, I wouldn't listen to that, right? I think thinking about where you can add and make some additions and upgrades and things like that, it can go a really long way. Yeah, that's what I would end with.
I think that's a great ending.
Beautiful.
Yeah. All right, Aubrey. So we've prepared you a little bit for our sweet and sours that we like to end on our episodes with. So it's totally up to you if you want to do sweet or sour first. I usually like to end on a sweet note. I'm a dessert gal, but you can do whatever order you want to do. And if they kind of overlap too, that's okay. But we'll have you do yours, and Emily and I will do ours.
Yeah, so my sour, then, since we'll end on the sweet note, they are not related at all, the sweet and sour. My sour is that we own a house, and that's not the sour. I just feel like mowing the grass never ends. That is my sour. I'm so tired of mowing the grass. I just am tired of it. So that's my sour.
How long does it take you? Sorry to interrupt. How long does it take you? Oh my gosh.
So we live on a half an acre of land, which is like a good bit of land. So I do have a riding mower. Very fancy.
Nice.
It was left here when we bought the house.
Ooh.
But it takes like an hour and a half to mow, but then we also have to weed whack. So it's a multi-step process. So maybe like 2 hours.
Okay, so 2 hours. So my husband, it takes like 4 or 5 hours, but he's got a push mower, but he likes walking, so he's fast. But I'm like, oh my gosh, we don't have time for this. I don't see you.
You're like 5 hours gone. 5 hours gone.
He might as well go golf. I don't care.
Yeah. Like, don't do something productive. But luckily, where I live, we do have somebody. I don't have that much land, but we do have somebody that mows it for us. So that's very nice. Cause I have terrible allergies. So I would die around the grass.
Me too.
I just can't, like my eyes get like super big. So I am thankful for the people that do that for us, but I feel you.
It's very fresh. I did it earlier today, so it's fresh.
It's a fresh wound.
Yes.
All right, going on to your sweet then, Aubrey. What is that?
Yes. So my sweet, much bigger and more important than the sour, because by the time this episode comes out, this will be public, but I did put in my bio that I am the culinary nutrition manager at Unite for Her. I just got that promotion yesterday. So
Yay!
Congratulations.
That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so that's my sweet. I've been riding that high.
That's a nonprofit, right?
It is a nonprofit, yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for doing that. I think dietitians getting into more nonprofits really beneficial, I think, for the communities. I know the pay is not always there, but I don't think dietitians went into our field for money. So, we went in, sure, to make a living of some kind, but to help people. So that's wonderful. Right. Thanks for doing that, Aubrey. And thanks for sharing your sweet and sours. So, Mickey, I'll go next. Okay. So my sour is, I feel like I don't have enough time to read like leisurely. I get done with work. I want to go to the gym. I have other things to do. I've got this beautiful podcast to do. I work with another kind of private company. So like I have no time for leisure reading. So whenever I go to the beach, that's when I try and get it in. But even just like 10 minutes, I'm trying to do every day. So that's my sour. And then my sweet is just something real quick. I'm getting my hair done next week by my beautiful stylist. I love going to see her. Love her salon. It's so beautiful. So it's a nice like 3-hour hangout and therapy session because we all know our stylists are our therapists as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. My hairstylist and I are like, we get closer every single time and we just vent about stuff, which is great. Yeah. Okay, so I'm up next, and my sweet's going to tie into kind of both, apparently tie into both of you, so I'm going to save that one for last. But my sour right now is, I have been very, very tired these past couple days, and I am getting annoyed with myself because I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to bed early, and then I end up, as soon as getting in bed, I'm like, wide awake, and then in the morning I don't want to get out of bed, so I'm like trying to like adjust myself back to like some sort of sleep schedule, and I'm like, okay, well now I just have to get up earlier, but it's very, I am not a morning person, so I just it's a struggle for me, but I feel like half of my day is wasted when I get up super late, and I just don't like it. So I'm making it a goal of mine to like adjust this. So my sweet is, so Emily, you were talking about reading, and Aubrey, I kind of avoided this connection a little bit. I wanted to talk about the podcast at the end. You know exactly what I'm going to talk about now, but
I sure do.
So, and it's my sweet, because I went there recently. So Aubrey, we know each other through the dietetics community, but what we inherently found out was we also know somebody else, and she is your sister-in-law, correct? Kind of ish.
Much.
Yeah. So your sister-in-law Bridget just opened Friendly Alien Bookstore in Scranton, and she is like the first independent bookstore in Scranton, as far as I know, because I've lived in the area for as long as I can remember. And
that's cool.
Yeah, so it's really cool, and she just opened it up, and it's a great space. And I did see you at like, they had like an open house, what was that, a month or two ago, and I did get to see you there, and so I'm giving them a shout out because it's really cool. I did get to go there this past weekend, and I bought 2 books. And Bridget did an amazing job, and I can't wait to go there more. It's within walking distance of the new Electric City Improv that just opened up. So that's also great. That's the new home theater. So Aubrey, you have to come to a show. I told you last time, but you got to come to a show one time. Emily loved it.
I do.
But yeah, so I am very excited for her, and that's my sweet because I got 2 new books and they're horror books and I'm excited to read them. So, well, when I get a chance.
Ooh,
And Emily, that's
nice.
kind of my sour too because I'm like, I don't have time to read them though, but I want to. So
You'll get there. You'll get
that's
there.
not going to help my sleeping because I usually read at night, so it prohibits me from sleeping. So that's the other problem. It's like a cyclical problem. But anyway,
Next relationship.
yeah, what I don't know. Love hate relationship. Yeah. But all right, well, this is not the last you will hear from Aubrey on this podcast because we intend to have her on a few more times. So, for the audience that are listening, if you have questions for Aubrey, please send them to us. You can comment them on YouTube or Spotify. There is a feature on Spotify where you can ask questions and comments directly. You can also email us or message us if you know us. And obviously we will link Aubrey's contact information and social media information in this podcast description and in the future ones. And so you will not see the last of Aubrey. She will have lots of good information coming out. But thank you so much, Aubrey. It was a pleasure. And
yes, thank you.
And for all of you listening, if you are in the mood for a boost of juice, please join us on Sundays, freshly squeezed episodes on Sundays of the RD Squeeze. We are in season 4 now, so if you made it this far, you are officially a big fan. And yeah, I can't believe we're here. But thanks for joining.
We appreciate you all for listening and keep on listening.
Yeah, have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Be sure to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram. We will always take topics you want to hear about, so message us for any topics you want to see covered on the RD Squeeze. Don't forget, it's dietitian with a T. We'll see you next time on the RD Squeeze.